Okay. Hmm. Okay, so maybe let us get started. Um, so, hello everyone. So we have guest speaker today for our next tutorial. Like I think depending on which course you are in, like so for machine learning, probably this is the fifth tutorial. Like for reinforcement learning, probably the second or third or I think third tutorial. Okay, so as you can see, this is a joint tutorial for both the courses. Like so, we will be going through PyTorch, which is an auto differentiation tool, which will help you to compute gradients for your ML and RL algorithms automatically. So for today's tutorial, like so, we have a guest speaker. So Shagun Sotani is research software engineer at Facebook AI Research Montreal. So, Shagun did his master's at University of Montreal, like advised by Yoshua Bengio and Jian Tang, and also he was also an ex Mila member. Shagun works in various topics in both machine learning and reinforcement learning. So today he'll be talking about like how to use PyTorch for implementing your machine learning and reinforcement learning algorithms. Like so, thank you, Shagun, for accepting our invitation to give this tutorial, and I hope students will learn like more about PyTorch directly from you.
Great, thank you. Am I audible? Do you want me to be a bit louder? Is everything good?
This is good. This is good.
Okay. So yeah, thank you, Sarath, for having me for the tutorial. As I've introduced, I'm a research engineer at FAIR. Lifelong learning and reinforcement learning are two main things that I work on. And I have been using PyTorch and have been talking about PyTorch for about 3 years now. So hopefully this tutorial would have something useful for everyone. One thing I want to say out upfront, please ask questions. Interrupt, stop me in between and ask questions. We also have a Jamboard in case you ask questions which are sort of difficult to describe without a whiteboard. So we have that covered. Please ask as many questions as you have. We would be at a very high level. We would be talking about only two things: how to use PyTorch and PyTorch ecosystem, which are two broad topics. The disclaimer is that all the content, the slide, it is based on PyTorch 1.9.1. And the reason I'm saying this out is PyTorch 1.10 came out, I think, 2 days or just a few days back. So in a sense, this content is a little bit outdated. It's not drastically outdated, but if you are using this, do keep this in mind that this is based on 1.9.1 and not 1.10. With this, we can get started with the Colab notebook, and the notebook and the slide deck, everything would be shared with you. So you don't really, you don't have to worry about having access to it. Yeah, let's get started with this. Is the zoom level sufficient? Do you want me to zoom in a bit more, or is this good?
This is good. And I think, like, would you be able to see the chat if somebody types questions?
I don't think I'll be able to see the chat.
Then probably I will let people unmute themselves. Like, so whenever somebody has a question, I think they can unmute and ask you directly.
Got it. Yeah, this sounds good. Thank you. Yeah, so PyTorch. What is PyTorch? It's a Python package, and it provides you two things. It gives you what is called as tensor computation, like an array. So it gives you operators, and it gives you a NumPy array kind of a tensor where you can perform different operations. The difference between NumPy and PyTorch at a high level, one difference is that NumPy tensors are CPU tensors, or NumPy arrays, as they call it, are CPU arrays, whereas PyTorch tensors can live on both CPU and GPU. So it's like NumPy, but with GPU acceleration. So that's the first piece. And the second piece is that it gives you this thing called as an autograd system. And we'll talk about it. But basically what autograd does is it enables you to take gradient for arbitrary functions. And it enables you to build deep neural networks, because neural networks, the basic training mechanism is backpropagation, which is basically autograd. So when you're using PyTorch, think of it as a tensor library, which also allows you to compute gradients. At a high level, PyTorch has these 5 or 6 components. We are not going to talk about all of them. We would basically focus on Torch, which is just the tensor library. We'll focus on torch.autograd, which provides you the automatic differentiation, and torch.nn, which provides some building blocks for constructing neural networks. Things like JIT, multiprocessing, and utils, these are also important, but they are not within the scope of this tutorial. This tutorial is running on a Colab notebook. So the good part is that you can just take this notebook and run it yourself. So you don't really need to set up anything locally. Oops. Yes. And another good part is Colab notebooks come with PyTorch pre-installed. So you don't even need to install PyTorch. In this case, I am going to install PyTorch and specifically use version 1.9.1. I think the default version that it would come out is with 1.9.0. So that's the only difference. But yeah, and along with PyTorch, I'm installing a bunch of other libraries just to have well-formatted outputs. They are not strictly needed. This is just so that the output looks cleaner. And I have all the imports in one place. Again, it's not super important to understand what they are doing. Some of these imports are so that we can upload files or download files from Colab. Some of them are more standard, like matplotlib.plot, and some of them are related to PyTorch. Okay, so in case you want to install the latest version, you can uncomment this line and you'll get the more recent version. I just want to spend a minute talking about what does this version, or how do you read this version? So the version here is 1.9.0 plus CU111. What it means is that PyTorch version is 1.9.0, and this PyTorch is compiled it's compiled with the support for CUDA 11.1. So when you see something like plus CU111, this basically means CUDA 11.1. In some other cases, you could, if I was to install 1.911, you would see the version as 1.9.1 plus CU102, where CU102 means that it is compiled for CUDA 10.2. So just a useful thing to know in case you see this and you're confused as to, hey, what is the difference between 1.9.0 versus 1.9.0 plus CU111? The second thing that we are running is we are running this command just to make sure that we actually have a GPU because we are going to do the operations on GPU. So we are just making sure that we have a GPU available, which we do in this case. Okay, so the setup is ready. We have talked about the high level things. Now let's get into using Torch. So you can think of Torch at 2 levels, right? Torch is arrays or these n-dimensional tensors plus GPU support plus AutoGrad, or you can think of Torch package, which is primarily a mechanism to interact with the tensors. So when I say Torch here, we are specifically focusing on the tensor aspect of Torch. We are not, for now, at least for some slides, we would not be focusing on AutoGrad or any other thing. So the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to use Torch to create tensors and see what kind of operations we can perform on those tensors, how to move around tensors, and so on. The first statement we have is tensors with 0 is equal to torch.0 1, 2, 3. And this torch.0 looks very similar to how you would make an array of zeros with NumPy. With NumPy, you will do something like np.zeros 1, 2, 3, let's say, and in Torch, you are doing torch.zeros. So at many places, you would see this similarity between the Torch API and the NumPy API. They are not 100% compatible, but they are very similar. So when I do something like tensors with zeros, I'm making a tensor of the shape 1, 2, and 3. And this tensor is going to be filled with zeros. And this is where you can see the tensor. And when I do tensors with zeros on GPU, I use the same thing, but I explicitly say that the device that I want to use is CUDA:0. I'll describe in a minute what :0 means, but what I'm saying is make this tensor on this CUDA device, on a CUDA device or a GPU device. And when I do not pass a device, then it assumes that the default value is device equal to CPU, which basically means that you're creating a tensor on a CPU. And you don't really need to provide this index :0. You can also write just CUDA, in which case it would default to using CUDA:0. And what CUDA:0 means is if you have a device which has multiple GPUs, you index those GPUs using this notation. So CUDA:0, CUDA:1, CUDA:2 is basically referring to the first, second, and the third GPU on the device. A last thing is I'm using this IC. This is basically a syntactic sugar to print out these tensors. You can very well use print. It's just that the output would be a little bit distorted. it would not render so cleanly, but otherwise all that IC is doing is it's just printing things in a more clean and more fancy way. Now, what we did here was we made a tensor on the GPU directly, but that need not be the case. We might want to make a tensor on CPU the way we did it here, and then send it to CUDA or to a GPU. And this is what this next example shows, where you take this tensor which you had already made on the CPU, and you do a .2 and you send it to the CUDA device. So you don't really need to make the tensors on GPU right away, though it can have performance benefits. And you can make tensors from Python list. You can make tensors from NumPy arrays. You can, so you're not restricted to use just the torch.zeros or torch.ones kind of syntax. You can, if you already have a Python list or an array, you can create tensors using that. In fact, there's this nice thing called as the Python NumPy bridge, which means you can take a you can take a NumPy array and convert it into a torch tensor by doing by calling this function called as torch.from_numpy. So it would take your NumPy array and it would convert it into a PyTorch tensor, and then you can take a tensor and bring it back to NumPy array by doing a .numpy. So that would look like So you have this nice bridge between PyTorch and NumPy, where NumPy arrays can be easily converted into PyTorch tensors and the other way around. Okay, a small question. What is the difference between these two operations? In one case, I'm doing a torch.tensor. So I have an array and I'm constructing a torch tensor by saying torch.tensor. Versus in the second case, I am taking a NumPy array and I'm converting it into a torch tensor by doing torch.from_numpy. Does anyone have an idea of what the difference might be between these two? Feel free to speak up. I can't see the chat. Okay, I'll just show an example of what the difference is going to be. And I think this is a subtle point where people can easily make a mistake. So I'm just gonna show this example. And I'm gonna start from this example. Okay, let's see. So I have a Python list. I'm gonna use this list to create a NumPy array. And in one case, let's make the NumPy array explicitly. So I'm making a NumPy array, and in one case, I'm saying that I'll make the tensor using, let's call it tensor_v1. I'm going to make the tensor using torch.tensor. In the second case, let's call it tensor_v2. I'm going to create the tensor using torch.from_numpy. Oops. And both of these things work. Both of these things are good. Let's print both of them and make sure they look exactly the same. Again, IC is just a syntactic sugar. You might as well use print. So I'm gonna print all the three things. So they are all identical, right? Now let's do something. Let's take this NP array and say that the first element of NP array is 100 now. So I had a NumPy array. I created two torch tensors using it, and now I'm mutating the NumPy array. What do you think would be the output this time?
One of them is created by reference.
Sorry, could you repeat?
Is one of them created by reference that I'm not sure which one, but I'm guessing one of them will have a change in the first element.
Yeah, exactly. So when you use torch.from_numpy, you reuse the memory, which means you are not allocating any new memory, which could be a good thing if you care about performance in some cases, but that could also be a bad thing because this could lead to surprises like this. So you can see that the NumPy array has changed and tensor_v2 has changed. So be careful when you're using something like this. It helps you save memory, but at the same time, it can give you surprises. Okay. So let's start with the linear regression example. Are there any questions so far? I think this is all we need to know to start with basic linear regression. But if there are any questions, happy to take them first. Okay. So we are going to do this linear regression example. It's a dummy. I'm going to create a dummy data set. The data set is, so I have a bunch of X's and a bunch of Y's. And this is how the data set looks like. So all the X's, so this is how the data set looks like. On the X, I have the literal X values because my features are supposed to be one-dimensional input. And my outputs are also one-dimensional. This is obviously a very dummy, very toy data set. The reason we are using something so simple is because we just want to show how to implement logistic regression from scratch. And in practice, we would actually never be implementing it this way. This is just to show that you can do it from scratch. And that's why we are taking such a sort of dummy data set. Can we think, sorry, could you, I can only see half of the question. Can you read it out?
In fact, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, can we think always of tensors as 3D arrays, or so? Because what is in fact the added value of using tensors? Because I can always do arrays of multiple dimensions and get the same thing, or not?
Yeah. So let's see. When you say array, are you referring to a NumPy array, or are you referring
in
to
general,
a
in general, like NumPy, or like?
Yeah. So a tensor is basically a multi-dimensional array, right? So a tensor is not very different from an array. In the context of what we are discussing, array is a terminology that NumPy uses. Tensor is a terminology that PyTorch uses. So both of them can be multi-dimensional. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I see. Thank you.
Okay, so this is how the data set looks like, and we since we have and we are hoping to learn a decision boundary which would classify them correctly. So let's see. So how does a linear regression model look like? So we have some input X, and we have some weight, and we compute the losses using W transpose X plus B. So I'm initializing a W, which is, in this case, since there's only one dimension, it's of shape 1, 1. And then I have a bias, which is also a scalar in this case. So we can compute the logit using the expression written here, and then we can use the sigmoid nonlinearity to convert it into the predictions. So far, so good, right? And if I somehow had the right values of W, then I would be able to get the predictions right away, and I'll be able to use it. So the task here is, I don't have the right values of W and B. I just initialize them to something. And so how do we learn the values of W and B? If there's any difference in the notation that you have seen in the class versus the notation you are seeing here, please speak up. Just want to make sure there is no confusion in the two notations. Okay, so once we have computed the predictions, we are going to compute the labels, and we are going to report the accuracy. And in this case, oops, I think I did not run this. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so what we see in this case is everything is, since W and B's are zeros, every output is 0, and every label comes out to be 0. So we have a simple model, but this model is not trained, and it's not making any meaningful predictions. This is basically performing randomly. So now what we are going to do is, since we are just using the tensor capabilities of Torch, we would have to do everything on our own. So we are going to track the gradients for the weights and the biases, and I'm defining these variables dw and db, where d stands for derivative. And I'm using the syntax zeros underscore like. So I'm saying whatever is the shape of W, give me another tensor like that, which is filled with zeros, and same for B. So I'm going to compute these. I'm going to track these gradients manually. And this is what my BC loss function is looking like. Again, we are not using the inbuilt functions from PyTorch. PyTorch has all these things built in. We'll come to it. But for now, if we had to implement everything on our own, this is how it would look like. And we just run it, and we look at the loss, and we hope that during training, this loss would go down. Now, I'm not going to go over the math, but this is how the expression for the gradients is going to come out. So the dw would be computed this way, and db would be computed this way. So I already computed the loss. I have the predictions. Using the predictions, I compute the gradients. which are now stored in DW and DB. And now this is going to look more and more sort of standard. So we have got some learning rate, and we have got an update equation, which is taking the initial weights and updating it in the direction of the gradients, scaled by this learning rate. And we plot the weights before and after the update just to make sure that the update was actually applied. So this is how these things would look like if we had to do them manually. And probably the most painstaking step in this would be the step where we have to compute the gradients manually. That's probably the most annoying part of this. Okay, so let's bring everything at one place. So we have got the weights. We have got this function which computes the predictions. We have initialized the gradients. We are computing the gradients, and we run it. So it's really the same thing that we saw earlier. It's just that instead of having it across 5 or 10 different cells, I have just put them into one single place. So it's not anything different than what we have seen. Now, one thing that we are going to do is there are these small things that we are doing on the fly. We are putting them as statements. We are just going to put them into dedicated functions so that it becomes easier for us to write a proper loop around it and to train it. So we have got a function which is going to initialize the parameters. So it's going to return as W and B, and it's going to initialize them as zeros. We have got a function which is going to compute predictions, labels, accuracy, and so on. And then we have this other function which is going to compute the gradients. Again, this is not, this is basically what we have been doing so far, just that we are putting them in functions so that we can reuse these functions. And within a few minutes, we would see how we can get rid of all these functions and use PyTorch constructs where we would not have to worry about how these things are working. So let's just see, we are initializing the parameters, we are computing predictions, we are computing the gradients, we are applying the gradients. There are all these things that are happening. So this is how the training loop would look like. The first statement, torch.manual_seed, it is basically put there to make sure that the results are reproducible. Manual_seed is going to is going to set a random seed so that when you run the loop once again, you get the same set of results. So now I'm using those functions. I'm computing W and B. I have this number of epochs that I'm going to perform. Well, in this case, all the data is in one batch. So I compute the predictions. I compute the accuracy. There are a bunch of metrics that I'm tracking. I'm tracking the steps, accuracy, and loss. I compute the loss. I apply the gradients, and that's it. So I do something here. Now, so I perform this, and what the curve that I get is basically a straight line. So I did 250 updates or something, and nothing changed. So there's something wrong with this model, and the model did not learn anything useful at all. So how do we go about debugging something like this? In this particular case, the problem is there are so many moving pieces that we have designed that it's very difficult for me to know that is it a mistake, or is it a problem with the hyperparameters, or is it a problem of me introducing a bug in some of these functions. So when I look at this and when I see that my model is not training, it's difficult for me to decide where the mistake could be because there are so many things that I have written here. And that's one motivation for not wanting to redefine these things on our own. We do not want to be in a situation where the system doesn't work and we do not know which thing to start checking. So what we will do is we would take the previous setup and we would start replacing the initial things that we had by PyTorch functions. And once we do that, then we are sure that our function implementations are correct. Then we only have to worry about the hyperparameters or data set and so on. But right now we have to worry about all the aspects of the system. So one thing that we had is this loss function, which was computing the BC loss. Instead of computing this BC loss using our function, we are going to use this function from Torch called as binary cross entropy. Let me write down what this F is. I think the import statement is somewhere on the top. Yeah, so this is what the F stands for. So Torch has, so we mentioned earlier that Torch has this library called as torch.nn, which has this neural network constructs or useful building blocks for neural networks. Torch.nn has this module called as functional. And functional, think of functional as a collection of useful functions. So functional has this function called as binary cross entropy, which would compute the binary cross entropy for you instead of you having to write it. So a lot of times you will see f dot something, and that basically means that we are using a function from torch.nn.functional. So in this case, we compute the BC loss, and we just make sure that the BC loss that we computed is exactly the same as the one that PyTorch library gives us. And this tells us that our implementation of the loss was correct.
I
And
have a question.
yeah.
So are all the functions from functional static functions? So basically we just use them along with the inputs and just get an output and that's it?
Yeah, so the word for that is stateless functions. And yes, all the
Yeah.
functions in PyTorch.nn.functional are stateless. So you have to pass any state if that is required.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and just for the sake of completeness, torch.nn.functional has a lot of functions. These are all the functions it has. So it's very likely whatever function you have a need for, that function would likely be defined. This is the specific set of class functions. So the one we are using is binary class entropy, and there's a lot more. Okay, then the other thing that we were doing was we were computing the predictions. We had this W transpose X plus B, and it turns out there's an inbuilt function for that as well. And that, I mean, this update or this equation that we are computing, this is basically the linear network, right? So PyTorch has the functional library that I was talking about, the function module that I was talking about, has this function called as linear, where it would take the input X, the weights and the biases, and it would give you the logits. And in this case, it might seem like not much of a saving, right? I mean, you had one line here and you have one line there. There are still two benefits of using f.linear instead of doing this computation manually. One reason is when you're doing these things manually, it is possible that you get the shapes wrong, and then the things are broadcast in the wrong shape, and then you get weird outputs. And generally, functional, the PyTorch functions would be faster as compared to doing things manually. So there are these two benefits, even when the change is sort of very small. And let me just show you the linear thing. Oops. Okay, there's a lot of linear stuff. Okay. So this is a linear function, which is going to just apply this, well, they call it as A, but it's basically W transpose X plus B. Okay, and we run this thing again, and we make sure that everything matches. I think this is the piece that we are going to look at now is the most sort of annoying piece, and it's the piece where PyTorch becomes extremely useful. What we were doing in this piece was we were trying to compute the gradients. So we had the predictions, then we computed we got the formula for the gradients manually, and then we were computing the gradients. And all this is now replaced by you compute a loss and you do a loss dot backward. And this is immensely useful because I mean, the formula that I've written here for DW and DV, that is specifically for the compute that is tied to this compute prediction method. So if I change the way I'm producing the outputs, I would have to rederive DW and DV. Sometimes the derivation would not be straightforward. It would take a lot of time. It is prone to be wrong. It's very easy to, even if you drive it correctly, it's very easy to implement it incorrectly. And all that is now replaced by this simple loss computation followed by a loss dot backwards. And I think this is the most valuable piece. And this is the AutoGrad engine. So the engine is going to compute the gradients for you automatically instead of you having to manually compute it and put down the formulas. The last thing to note here is earlier I was computing DW and DV. In this case, when I do something like loss dot backward, the weights and the biases, they have a .grad attribute set for them. And I'm just returning that .grad attribute. So that's one difference. Obviously, in practice, you would not be returning the gradients as we would go to Optim and other packages. So you wouldn't probably see this statement again after this tutorial, but it's useful to know that the gradients are set in this attribute called as .grad. Yeah, and when you're using the AutoGrad engine, once you have initialized the gradients, in this particular example, since this is a sort of, we are starting with a system and we are replacing pieces, I have to add these two statements, which are basically saying that W and B should be tracking their gradients. In practice, when we start implementing neural networks using torch.nn, we would not be seeing a statement like this. All that would be taken care of by the system. But in this case, since we are replacing pieces, we have to put this explicit statement as well. So I do that, and then we look at, oops, I think I am missing an init param somewhere. Let's see. in it. I think it was this one. No, is it this one? Not even this. Oh, okay, it was here. Yeah, when you would be running it end to end, you would likely not have this problem. Okay. Oops. Okay, another thing that you would have noticed is in this case, when I'm computing the gradients, when I'm matching the gradients in the two versions, for the bias, I'm explicitly making sure that the gradients are exactly equal to 0, but with the weights, I am setting the gradients to be, the difference in the gradients to be less than 1e minus 7. And that is one thing you would often see when you perform the same operation in two different ways, even when it's the exact same thing, you would not see the output to be exactly the same. And this basically happens because of underflow sometimes. The TLDR is, even if the values do not exactly match, but they are in the range of 1e minus 7, 1e minus 8, that is good enough. And this becomes even more tricky when you have extremely large matrices or tensors. And in those cases, if you hope that all the values would be exactly the same, that would likely not happen. So in practice, it's better to use something like this and set epsilon equal to 1e minus 7. Oops. See, we can see what this value is exactly. I don't recall what this value would be in this case. Yeah, it's something of the order of 1e minus 7. Ignore the grad fn part. We don't care about it for now. And I should have done an IC, but yeah, it's not much of a problem. Okay, so let's move on to the other pieces. So earlier when we were applying the gradients, we had this custom function written where we were saying the new weights are going to be equal to the old weight minus the learning rate into the delta, into the gradient. And that piece can now be replaced by what is called as an optimizer. An optimizer, think of an optimizer as a stateful object. It's going to, so when you create an optimizer, you tell it what are the weights and the biases that it is supposed to track. And when an optimizer does, when an optimizer steps through, so when an optimizer steps through, it looks at the parameters it has, it looks at their gradients, and it basically applies this equation for you. So instead of you writing this equation, the optimizer takes care of it for you. There are two benefits of using an optimizer. The first benefit, which is probably more obvious here, is imagine instead of just W and V, I had, I don't know, 100 different weights and biases or 100 different parameters. In that case, I would be writing 100 different statements in the apply grad function. Whereas with the apply grad V2, nothing really would change. I would just pass whatever number of extra parameters I have here, and everything else would remain the same. The other benefit, which is more sort of subtle, is it is very straightforward to implement an SGD update. But if you wanted to implement an SGD update with momentum, or an SGD update, or an Adam update, or an AdaGrad update, or so on, then things become more involved. Whereas with torch.optim, you have all these optimizers built in. So you, instead of using SGD, for example, you use Adam, and you're done, and everything else remains the same. It also makes it easier to do things like setting learning rate, weight decay, for example. I think this is what they call it. Yeah, weight decay. So you can set the weight decay parameter and other things as well within the optimizer, instead of having to implement those things on your own. What does optimizer.step do? It is basically running these two equations. And what does optimizer.zeroGrad does? Well, this is a sort of subtle point, but what happens is when you had the weights and the biases, and then when you did this loss.backward, we saw that w.grad was populated. Now, what happens if, let's write it down a bit more. So initially, loss.grad would be none, or it would not exist. Then you'll do a loss.backward. So this would be populated. Now, let's say what happens if I do another loss.backward. In that case, whatever new gradients are, they would be accumulated into w.grad. So what would happen is every time you do backward, the gradients would be added up, and you want to set those gradients to 0 once you've applied them. And this is what optimizer.zeroGrad does. So it applies the gradient. So step would apply the gradient, and .zeroGrad would set the gradients to be equal to 0. This is what this is doing. You did not have to worry about it in this case, because we were not tracking the gradients within the weights of the biases. So we were computing the gradients separately and we were adding them, and that's why we did not have to worry about setting anything to 0. Please feel free to ask questions. So now we are also going to apply the gradients and not just sort of compute them. And so we apply the gradients and we again make sure that the things match up. And again, notice that I'm using this epsilon to make sure that things are similar. Things are probably not going to be exactly the same. And there would still be a difference of 1e minus 8 or 1e minus 7. Okay, so now I basically took the loop that we had earlier and this entire loop with this loop with 250 steps. I took that and I rewrote it using the PyTorch constructs. So so this is one extra line that has come in, which you would probably not see once we start using PyTorch PyTorch NN more completely. We have now gotten an optimizer. We have got an optimizer.0brad step. I should, just for the sake of completeness, I should put a hash new here. So there's no confusion. So now this looks much more cleaner. This looks much more explicit. So you create an optimizer, you have the data, you compute the predictions, you compute the accuracy. Well, this is a metric that we are tracking, so we don't need to compute it per se. So you have the optimizer, you set the gradient to 0, you compute the loss, you do a backward, and you do an optimizer.step. So this is some sort of a clean recipe which is coming out. And you can use this recipe every time. So it doesn't really matter what your network is doing or what your task is. You create the optimizer, you create the model, you compute the predictions, you compute the you set the gradients to 0, you compute the loss, you do a backward through the loss, you step through the optimizer, and you keep repeating it. So the benefit of modularizing or writing everything in functions was this sort of a pattern comes out nicely. Okay, in this case, we now see that things are at least moving a bit down and things are looking somewhat better now. Is there anything we want to go over in this example? Oh yeah, I think I just ran the same thing again with I think the previous function. So this is using the newer functions and the newer constructs, while this one is using the previous constructs. Okay, let's see if yeah, and this is the recipe that I was talking about. So you have a model, you have the optimizer, you compute the output, you reset the gradients, you compute the loss, you do a backward, you update the model, you step through the model. Yeah, so we started with this standard logistic regression example, how to implement it in torch.tensor, using torch.tensor, and then we saw how to replace pieces of it with what Optim provides us, or what torch.nn provides us. We still haven't replaced one important piece, which is the model itself, right? Everything else has been replaced, but we are still tracking weights and biases separately. We haven't replaced the model, which we are gonna do now. So that is one thing that we haven't taken care of. The second thing that we haven't taken care of is all this training was happening on CPUs. I haven't started using GPUs yet. So these are two things that we are gonna address in the remaining part of the tutorial. But are there any questions before that? Okay, so let's go over these pieces now. Let's address the piece about the GPU. Oops. Let's address the piece about GPU use first. PyTorch provides this construct called as a device. So when you are starting to use PyTorch, you can create a device, and the function call works the same way. So when you write CUDA colon 0, this means you are using the first GPU on the device, or you could make a CPU device by saying device is equal to torch.device CPU. And now on, instead of writing dot to CUDA or to CPU, we would be doing a dot to device. So we would be doing something like this. And the reason of doing that is, if I want to change the device, instead of changing it everywhere in my code, I can just change the device here from this to this, and everything would run on CPU. Back to this, and everything would work on GPU. So instead of setting the device everywhere explicitly, we are going to use this device, and if we ever need to change it, we change it in one place. Okay. Now we are going to look at how to define a model. Now this part is not very specific to logistic regression. We are gonna make it a bit more general. So the models that I would be defining, those models need not be used for logistic regression. They could be used for anything now. And I'm setting a bunch of things in this cell. So I'm setting up some batch sizes, some input output shapes. Yeah, so I'm just setting them up front, and we'll be using them below. So let's see. So the first thing that I'm defining is a simple model, and the model that I'm defining is it's a sequential model. This sequential model, think of sequential model as literally a sequence of models. So a sequential model is a model which is a sequence of models, and it has multiple models within it. So the first model that we have is this nn.linear, which means it's a linear model. nn.relu is a non-linearity like sigmoid. We might as well just write sigmoid here to avoid any confusion. And the third model, or the third model that I'm putting in this container, is a linear model. And when I look at the, when I print this model, oops, I think I did not run this. Oops, I did not even run the device. I hope it doesn't take too much time. Oh, yeah, it's taking a little bit longer here because this is the first time I'm putting, I think this is the first time I'm putting something to the GPU on this notebook. I mean, when I'm running it with you guys. And that's why you see that the initial startup overhead is visible here. So you have this operation takes about 14 seconds, which would not be the case in general, but the first operation can be a bit expensive. Okay, so let's see. So what I have got is, so when I look at this model, I've got a linear layer, I've got a sigmoid layer, and I've got another linear layer. And these are the shapes of these components. A -1 basically means the batch dimension. So it could be anything. And it gives you the model size and other things as well. Are you guys familiar with the linear model? It's basically the same W transpose X plus V. Earlier, at some point we were writing it by hand. Then we started using this functional. And now we are looking at the nn.linear piece, but this is basically a simple W transpose X plus V. Does this piece make sense? If not, I'm happy to break it down a bit more and talk more about this piece. Okay, let's just break down this example a little bit more. Because I might have made a jump here. So let's see what we are trying to do. We want to define a linear model, let's say. One way of defining this linear model was this f.linear. Oops. That was one way of defining it. The problem with f.linear was that when we were passing an x, we also had to pass a w and a b to it. So we had to take care of this weights and biases. And for just weights and biases, this is probably not too difficult, but when you have a lot of such weights and biases, it becomes tricky. So instead of using a functional module, what we are going to use is a stateful module. A stateful module basically means that the module will track its state. And the state here is weights and biases. So let's see how would a stateful model look like. So I would write a linear underscore model is equal to nn.linear. The input shape is, let's say, 100. The output shape is, let's say, 128. So this linear underscore model is a model that has its own weights and biases. I'm not explicitly defining them, but it has those. And to show you that it has those things, I think dot weight should work. Yeah, so when I do dot weight, I see the weight tensor. Let's do a bunch of things. Oops. Again, IC is just a syntactic sugar. So it should have a weight, it should have a bias, and since it has a bias, it should have a bias.shape as well. Let's see. So the first thing is, since my network is of the size 100 cross 128, it does have, the shapes do match up. The second thing that you see is when I print linear model.weight, it is a tensor which is tracking its gradients on its own. So if you remember earlier, I said that when we are making this weights and biases, we have to do this requires underscore grad equal to true. But now when you're using these stateful models, you do not have to do those things. The model would take care of these things. And similarly, I've got the bias parameter, which also is tracking its gradients, and the shape and everything else comes out nicely. So the benefit of using stateful modules is you do not have to take care of weights and biases on your own. The model is containing them. Does this make sense? Okay, and so the second thing that we were showing is, hey, why should I have just one such model? I want to have linear underscore model underscore 2. And this linear model would have an input of shape, let's say 128, and it would have an output of size 256. And now what I want to do is have a model which calls both these models. So then I could have a stacked underscore model. And since I have a collection of models, I can use nn.sequential. Sequential creates a sequential, it creates a sequence of models. I can pass both the models, which is basically what I was doing here, but I can pass both the models again. So I have a linear model and I have a linear model 2. And now when I think it's called summary. Yeah, it's called print summary. Now, when I do something like this, actually, we have already looked at the summary. Let's just look at the stack model now. Yeah, I've got a model which has 2 layers. The first layer is a linear layer, and the second layer is also a linear layer. So does it make sense? So we can make these models, and then we can stack them together as we like, and we can make more powerful models or bigger models. And just like we have an nn.linear, we can have an nn.con. Con underscore model is nn.con. I don't recall the exact functions, but I think I have to pass input kernel and probably the output channels, and then I can put it here. And this should hopefully work. Is it con 2D? I think it's con 2D. Okay, I need to pass the kernel size as well. Yeah, don't worry about what these things is. It's basically that you can take all these arbitrary models and put them one on top of another, such that the input would go through the first layer, then the first model, second model, and so on. And then once you have a model, now this model is on CPU. I can just say a .to device, and this model would be sent to the device that it corresponds to. And the good part is I don't really have to worry about sending each and every weight and bias to the right place. I just do a .to device and it's done. So let's do something. Let's look at, let's make sure that things actually went to the right place or not. So I'm going to take this linear model, and then I'm going to say linear model dot weights dot weight. Yeah, so now you see when you look at the weight, you see that the weight automatically was sent to the CUDA device, even though all that I sent to the device was the linear model. I did not touch linear model dot weight. So the stateful model is going to track all these things for you. And when we look at the documentation, it has all the architectures that you might require, starting from feed-forward networks to transformers. It has all these layers. It has ConvNets, recurrent layers, transformers, linear layers, and so on. So it has all these layers already in there. Okay. Now, it is still possible that despite all these things that are available as part of as predefined layers, you might need something that does not exist, or you might want a model that does not exist. And so it's pretty straightforward to write your own models. And the way we are gonna write a model is to subclass this class called as an nn.module. So if you want to write your own model, you can just subclass an nn.module. When you subclass nn.module, you need to define 2 functions. You need to have this underscore init function. And the second function that you need is a forward function. The forward function is basically, think of this as what your neural network is supposed to do. That's it. You do not have to worry about how to compute the gradients and anything else. You just have to define how the forward pass of the network should be done, or what exactly should the network be doing. And in the init function, the first thing that you have to call is this super.init. So these are the 2 things that you have to keep in mind. Have an init function and call super.init as the first function call. and have a forward function which does what you want the system to do. So what I'm doing in this case is I have this base layer, which is a linear layer. Then I have a ReLU layer. Again, we can make it sigmoid. ReLU is just another non-linearity. And we can have another linear layer. And in my forward call, I'm saying this is what I want this is what I want to happen. So I should take X, pass it through the linear layer, get an encoding out, pass that encoding through the sigmoid, get another encoding out, and pass that encoding through the head and return the output. And that's it. That is a full model. So if you take a model like this and you compute the loss and you do loss dot backward, everything, the gradients and everything would be taken care of on its own. You don't have to take care of it. And just like before, we can send this entire model to a GPU device by doing this .to device. All the weights biases corresponding to all these intermediate, all these attributes would be sent to the right device on their own. And this is how the output would look like. It would not be ReLU, it would be sigmoid. Let's just run it again. Yeah, so this has become sigmoid now. Are there any questions so far? Okay, so in that case, I'm probably gonna stop here for the PyTorch related part. I mean, so for the PyTorch plus sort of model related part, there are a bunch of other things here which are not super compulsory to be known. It's useful to know them, and we can go over them in the next tutorial. If there are any questions, we can first take the questions. If not, we can talk about how to implement a DQN using what we have seen so far. How to implement a DQN and train an agent to control the cart pool. So before we do that, is there any question so far? And the slides are, I mean, the notebook is accessible to you. So obviously you're free to, read further ahead and so on. But from a sort of, beginner perspective or to get started, things that we have discussed so far are more than enough. Any questions, anything? Okay, let's go to the DQN example then. Just scroll through it once again to see if there's something that I want to talk about. No, the other things are things that we can talk in the next session as well. You would, if you go through it, you'll see that there's like more examples of optimizers and everything else in there. Some failure cases where the hope is that you run it, you'll see it doesn't work, and then you'll be like, okay, how do we spot the error? Yeah, okay. So just want to start with a quick recap of what we are going to see in the DQN example. So what we would have, so it's a standard RL example. So what we would have is we would create an agent. This agent would be interacting with an environment. This environment would be coming from this. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that it wasn't placed properly. Let's start again. Okay, so what we're going to see is that since it's a standard RL problem, we would have an agent. We would have an environment. The agent would be interacting with the environments by taking actions, and the environment would be returning an observation and some reward. The goal is to learn an agent which can maximize the expected return, and we would be implementing it as an nn.module. So we would be using PyTorch to implement this agent, and we would hope that the agent can be, that the weights of the agent can be learned. And for the environment, we would be using this standard Python library called as GYM. GYM is a collection of reinforcement learning environments, and the environment we'll be using is called as cart pool. where the task is that there's a, I'll be showing this with the simulation as well, but there's this cart where there's a pole, and the task is that the pole should not fall. So you should balance it such that the pole does not fall or does not deviate too much from the perpendicular line. Is the setup clear, or are there any questions about the setup itself? Okay, so let's see. Oops, I got disconnected. Let me refresh. So yeah, so this is a DQN tutorial. It's a standard tutorial on the PyTorch website. I'm pretty much gonna use it. Let's see what are the different pieces that we care about in this case. So Gym is the library, which is the collection of the environments, as I said earlier, and then we have these different Torch modules that we are using. We are also using this library called as Torch Vision. And what Torch Vision is, think of it as a collection of functions specifically for computer vision use cases. The reason we are using this is the observations that we'll be getting, they would be pixel observations. So we get the observations, we transform them using Torch Vision, and then we train a network on top of it. So the first thing that we do is we make this environment. So gym.make is going to create the environment for us, and the environment is cart pole v0. We are again setting the device. There's this notion of replay buffer or replay memory. It's the same thing. I think in the class here you see word replay buffer, but it's basically the same thing. Since this is a simple example, the replay buffer or the replay memory is very straightforward. So we have a Python deck that we are using, and a Python deck is a double-ended queue. So you can do efficient inserts from both the ends. So we're using that. It's not super efficient, but in this case, we probably don't care so much about it. Is there a question? Okay, maybe not. And this is a standard DQN algorithm. We're not going to go over it. But yeah, it's in one place in case you want to have it next to you when you're looking at it. So this is the main piece that we care about. We want to have this DQN model, and let's come back to the model in a few minutes. But basically what we want to do is we want to define this DQN model, and we hope that we would be able to train this model, but ignore the definition of the model for a minute. We'll come to it. Let's look at everything else that we have. So what are the other things that we have? So we have a resize function, and this resize function, it takes the image that we get from the environment, it resizes it. So again, you don't need to worry about why are we doing this specific resizing and so on. This is basically a sort of pre-processing step. There are some functions related to, there are some functions for rendering the images correctly. I think this notebook would not work in Colab because it requires you to render something. So you would have to run it locally because of the rendering step involved. Yeah, okay. So let's look at this piece. Remember, we haven't defined the model yet, but if we assume that we have the model somehow, let's see what we are basically trying to do. We have all the hyperparameters defined here: the batch size, gamma, the start, end, decay, and the target update. We have these functions, the function which is going to give us the screen as well as the height and the width, so that we know what is the shape of the input to the agent. We have n actions, which gives us the action space is what all actions can the agent take, and n actions gives us the number of possible unique actions there are. Since this is DQN, you have a finite number of actions and you have to choose from one of them. So when we are creating the DQN agent, we have to make sure that the output of the DQN agent, the action output is of the size n action. So we have one prediction corresponding to each action. We are making two networks. There's a policy net and a target net. And then we are tying, okay, so this piece is a little more involved. Let's talk about this piece in more detail. Oops. So the piece that we want to talk about is this specific part. There are a lot of things happening here, so we are gonna break it down into smaller pieces. Okay, So the first thing is happening is we are defining a policy network, and then we are defining a target network. Don't worry about how DQN is defined. We'll see it. And once we have got the target network, we want to tie the weights of the target network with the policy network, which basically means that we want to initialize the target network with the weights of the policy network. So the line that you see, target_net.load state dect, this is basically going to do that. So let's see how this is going to do this thing. Let's define a model, a simple model from import torch.nn, import torch. Let's define a model torch.nn.linear of the shape 100, 128. So I've got a model here. Oops. Where's the model? Yeah, I've got a model here. And if I want to look at, if I want a dictionary with the state of the model, and the state of the model is going to the weights and biases, then I can do this model.state_dect. So model.state_dect is going to give me a dictionary where the keys are the parameters and the values are the values of those parameters. So once I get this, I can, so let's say state is equal to this. And now let's say I want to make another model, new model, which is also a linear model. And I want to set the state of the new model to be the same as the state of the model. Then I can do new_model.load_state_dect and pass the state to the previous, to the newly created model. This line, all keys match successfully, basically means that the state has been successfully loaded. And now what would happen is whatever weights the model had, new model has the same exact values of the weights, because it's basically as if we have taken each tensor and copied it into the new model. So load state dect enables you to do it in one function call. You do not have to actually enumerate all the different tensors and weights and biases that the model is tracking. So by doing this load state dect, we are basically making sure that whatever weight the policy net had, that weight is now on the target net as well. Does this operation make sense? And the last thing is targetNet.eval. TargetNet.eval is useful if you have things like dropouts. So when you have dropout layers, okay, I don't think dropout layers have been covered, but the idea is sometimes some layers can behave in a slightly different way depending on whether you are using them for training or for evaluation. And an example is, for example, dropout. When you're using a network which has dropout layers during evaluation, you do not actually apply dropout. It's as if you sort of turn it off. And doing .eval tells the model to turn off all those layers, which have, or it basically tells the layers that you are supposed to behave as if you are in the eval mode. So if you haven't used batch norm or dropout, you can ignore this statement for now. Yeah, so we are defining the optimizer. Why is it moving so much? So we are defining the optimizer, and we are defining this replay buffer, which they're calling as memory here. This function is basically going to plot. This function is basically going to plot the returns that we get, and this function select action. So given a state or the input from the environment, this is just going to sample an action for us using the epsilon greedy policy. Again, I'm not going into the details of what epsilon greedy is, and this part is not very PyTorch specific. So all this is doing is, I mean, you do see some constructs like torch.tensor and so on, but now you understand what torch.tensor does. It takes a list and converts it into a tensor. Okay. If there's any question, please interrupt me and please ask the questions. I'm trying not to go in too much into the RL specific pieces and focus just on the PyTorch specific pieces. But if there's something which is not clear, please let me know. Okay, so then we have got the main loop where we are going to perform the updates. Again, we are going to skip most of the RL specific parts. We have got the transitions. We are creating a batch. We are tracking whether the episode had terminated or not. We are computing the state action values and so on. So we are preparing the Bellman update. I think the most important piece is we had this loss function, which they are calling as criteria, but this is basically a loss underscore function, let's say. So I've got this loss function, And given the loss function, compute the loss. And loss is basically the difference between the state action values and the expected state action values. Again, we are not going into the specifics of how these are being computed since this is part of the algorithm. But so this is where you compute the difference between these two values. And once you have a loss, all you have to do is an optimizer.zeroGrad, a loss.backward, and optimizer.step. I'll talk about what this piece is doing in a minute, but this is basically what you're doing at high level. So you've got the optimizer, you set the gradients to be 0, you compute the loss, do a backward, so that the gradients are populated, and then you do an optimizer.step through it. What this specific piece is doing, let's just bring it out on the top so that we can focus on this piece. What this piece is doing is it's saying that when you're applying the gradients, clip the gradients so that they are not too large. And this is more of a trick to make sure that the training is stable. I mean, this is more because we are trying to solve an RL problem. So we just want to make sure that when we are applying the gradients, those gradients are not very high. So we take every parameter. Every parameter has a gradient. We look at the gradient and we clamp the value of that gradient to be in the range of -1 to 1. Let's look at an example of what clamping means. Let's say I have a torch.tensor. Let's say this is a tensor that I have. It's a tensor of 1s and 2s. I multiply everything by 2, so now I have a tensor of 2s. And then I say dot clamp -1, 1. So what this is going to do is any value which was more than 1 would be made to 1. Any value which was less than -1 would be made into -1. And any value which is in between these two values would remain the same. So clamping is basically making sure that the gradients do not change too much. And the last piece is that instead of using clamp, they are using this thing clamp underscore. And what underscore does is, let's see this example as well. So let's say I have a dummy underscore tensor. Oops. So I have a dummy tensor, and I'm going to print this dummy underscore tensor. Now I say that, hey, dummy underscore, take the dummy underscore tensor and clamp it, and let's make it 2. Yeah, so I take this and then I say, hey, take the dummy underscore tensor and clamp its values. But obviously this is not going to change the value of dummy underscore tensor, right? So I need to do something like this, and then it would change the value of dummy underscore tensors. But alternatively, instead of doing this, I could have done this clamp underscore, in which case it is called as an in-place operation. An in-place operation basically means that you are implicitly performing the operation on the same value, on the same tensor. And now you would see that even though I did not do an assignment, the value within the dummy underscore tensor has been updated. So this is again more of a syntactic sugar. You might very well, instead of this, you might very well do this, and it would be the same thing. In-place operators have some benefits. They have some drawbacks. For now, we can just ignore that and we can just do something like this. And there are in-place versions for a lot of operations. So clamp is not an exception. There are in-place versions of a lot of operations available. Are there any questions, or should we go ahead?
Yeah, hi. There is a minor doubt. So what would happen if we are trying to clamp a tensor with, let's say, for example, I have a tensor which includes values between 0 and 1 and then values above 1 as well. Then what if I try to clamp it between -1 and 1? What would happen to the values which are already between -1 and 1?
Those values would be untouched. So let's take a concrete example. Let's say -2, -1, -0.1, 0, 0.1, 1, 2, right? And oops, sorry, it's not short tensor. So -2 has been replaced by -1. -1 is -1, so nothing changes. -0.1 is -0.1. 0 remains 0, 0.1 remains 0.1, 1 remains 1, and 2 becomes 1. So anything that is outside the range is clamped. The things which are within the range are not changed.
Okay, when we say clamp, does it essentially mean that whatever is below the lower limit would be set to the lower limit, and whatever is
Yes.
above the lower limit would be, upper limit would be just replaced?
I mean, it's the same thing, right? Like
Yeah.
anything below the lower limit would be replaced by the lower limit. Anything above the upper limit would be replaced by the upper limit. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So we cannot just compare it to normalization or anything of that sort.
Oh
It's just
no.
clamping.
This is more of I mean, we can write an expression for it, but it's
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so again, we haven't talked about how the architecture is looking like. We'll do it in a minute, but I want to make sure that everything else, if you forget about the model, the other pieces make sense. So I've got the optimizer, do the zero grad, this clamping of gradients is done for stability, and then you do a step through the optimizer. Good thing is, even though you are changing the gradients, optimizer knows that the gradients are changed. So you don't really need to tell the optimizer that you are changing these gradients. Okay, and this is a standard RL learning loop. So you have a number of episodes. You reset the environment. That's the first thing. You get the screen. What they are doing in this case is they take the current screen, the current output, the last screen, the previous output, and they take a difference between those. So instead of actually feeding the current pixel observation, they actually take the difference between these two and they feed that. Again, this is more of an RL specific aspect. This is less about PyTorch. I mean, PyTorch wouldn't care if you were feeding in the current screen as well. So this is more to make the training faster or to learn better, but this doesn't change the flow of logic. Yeah, so you compute the action, you take the action, the system gives you reward. It gives you, okay, these things are not written, you can just write it down. It gives you a state. It gives you the reward, whether you were done or not, and then environment returns this thing called as an info, which you can ignore for now. I don't think info is used anywhere here. So you get a state transition, you put it into the replay buffer, and you set the current state equal to, you set the next state equal to the current state. You call the model optimize, which was basically sampling items from the replay buffer, computing the value loss, and doing a backdrop followed by optimization step. And that's it. That's what you do. Now, I can run it locally. I cannot run it on this. I can run it locally. Sorry, would not be able to see it. I mean, you would not be able to see the code. I'm basically running this, but you can see. Can you see the? Okay, I don't think you can see that. Let me share this screen once again. Share screen. So do you see this carpole moving around and so on? And on the side, we are tracking the rewards that the system has got. Okay. So let's go back to what we had. Where's the? This is the one. And for reference, I took the code and just put it in a Python file and ran the same thing. So you didn't really have to change anything here. Now the last piece that we want to look at is the DQN. Okay, there is a question. Now I can see it. Oh, that's an old question. Okay. Let's look at the last piece, which is the architecture of the network itself, the DQN model itself. So you would see that when we are defining the model, we have this forward function which we have defined. And the second thing is, the first thing that we do within the init function is calling the superclass. With the new Python syntax, you don't even need to do this, and this is good enough. So you call the superclass, and that's it. The network is, you have got a bunch of convolutional layers. So con1 is con2d. You've got a bunch of batch norm layers. Again, don't worry about the batch norm layer if you haven't done it yet. We are using batch norm layers because we have this pixel observation as the input here. So you've got this bunch of conv layers and bunch of batch norm layers, and all that you're doing is, in the forward call, you basically take the sample that you've got from the replay buffer, you put it to the right device. So you push it to the GPU, and then you just compute. You keep computing the X values. So first you pass it through the convnet, conv1, followed by batch norm, followed by ReLU, and so on. And if you think about it, you can pretty much write this as one NN.sequential as well. In this particular case, they opted to implement it as an NN.module. And there is some logic related to computing the shape of the input to the linear layer and so on. And this logic is there because when you have convnets, depending on what the kernel value is, what the kernel size is, stride is, and so on, the output shape differs a bit. So this is just some computation to compute the size of the output size from the convnets. But if you knew those things, you wouldn't even need to have this logic here. So you could just get rid of this. Let's say I know that the output size is going to be 128. I can just write this. Okay. Let's just talk about this last piece called as view. I think view came out at a bunch of places. So I just want to make sure that piece is also clear to everyone. So let's say I have torch_tensor, which is torch.random, I think. Rand would also do 100, 128. So I have a tensor which is of the shape 100, 128, and now I want to reshape. Let's just first print the shape. So this is what the shape is, but instead of this shape, I want to change the shape to be, let's say, 10, 10, 128. So what I would do is I would say torch.tensor.view. View is how do I want to view this tensor, 10, 10, 128. And so the new tensor, oops, let me put a dot shape. And the new tensor that I'll see would have the shape as 10, 10, 128. Or let's say instead of 128, I want it to be 64,4, 64,2. And then I could have a tensor of shape 10, 10, 64,2. So its view is basically a straightforward way of changing the shape of the tensor. What happens if I put in a wrong shape? Well, the system would complain. It would say that this shape is not possible. What happens in a case like this, where now the shape would work out? So you can also have shapes as 1 in case you want to. So when you're doing view, you can have this extra dimensions put in, and that would also change not just the shape, but it would also change the what is it called as the order of the tensor. So now it's a 4-dimensional tensor instead of 2-dimensional as it was originally. Every once in a while, you might face a problem with view. We wouldn't go into why that happens. It's basically about how memory is managed. So instead of that, you can also use this thing called as a reshape. Oops, I should still be putting a dot shape. So you can do a reshape as well instead of a view, and that would give you a similar effect. Okay. We have about 9 minutes left. Is there any question? And I'm happy to stay back a bit more, but are there any questions here? Okay, I assume there's no question, in which case we can probably just go through the remaining slides. One thing which would be useful is for the follow-up lecture on, for the follow-up session on 5th November, it would be useful if you guys can provide some input in terms of what specific aspects of advanced PyTorch are you interested in. If not, then I'll do what I think is reasonably advanced, but those things may be completely irrelevant for you. So if you provide some feedback in terms of, hey, these are the topics we're interested in, it would be easier to, it would be more engaging for you guys to have those topics covered. Again, please let me know if there are questions. If not, I'll just go through the remaining pieces on the slide, but it's more valuable to have questions than to go through the remaining slides. Okay. So yeah, what I'm basically showing in the remaining slides is that when you go to pytorch.org, you have this bunch of tutorials which are available. Pytorch.org. Okay. Oops. So you go to the tutorials tab and you have all, actually I can show these things. So when you go to pytorch.org/tutorials, you have tutorials on all these topics available, and you can choose the ones which are most relevant for you. For example, the DQN example that I was using was from the reinforcement learning section, and it has another example with Mario playing an RL agent. Yeah. So you can find more targeted or more relevant tutorials from this. These are the different broad categories which are covered. In terms of PyTorch ecosystem, I'll just quickly highlight that PyTorch ecosystem is this collection of about 100+ libraries, tools, and projects. They are available, or they are listed rather, on pytorch.org/ecosystem, and they might or might not be interesting or relevant for you. A few sort of examples that I think people generally use is, for example, Scotch, which is a PyTorch library which is compatible with the scikit-learn interface. There's PyTorch Lightning, which is Keras-like ML library for PyTorch. There's Putine, which is also sort of a Keras-like framework for PyTorch. There's Torch Vision, which we were talking about. It provides support for computer vision use cases. There's implementations, probably not super relevant. Allen NLP for doing NLP tasks. DGL for graph-related use cases. PyTorch Geometry for deep learning on graphs. Captum and Crypton for privacy-preserving ML and interpretable ML. And then there's finally PyTorch Hub, where a lot of pre-trained models are available. I think the most important thing I think is the community of PyTorch. So there's this forum called as pytorch.discuss.org, which is this very nice forum where you can post your queries, you can post your questions about, hey, how do I scale this thing? How do I, this is not working for me, or these are the kind of issues I'm running in. The community is very responsive, and you generally get response pretty quickly. Yeah, I think this is it from my side. Yeah. Any questions? Anything you want to ask?
I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. First of all, I would like to say thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. I just have a question, not necessarily on what you presented today, but more on your role at Facebook. Would you mind, I don't know if you can maybe share with us some of the projects you're working on?
Yeah.
If you can.
The projects are mostly around lifelong learning and reinforcement learning and different flavors of them. Some of these projects are open-ended research projects, which traditionally or typically result into paper publications and those kind of things. And other projects are more sort of longer horizon, where you do not expect a paper to come out within 6 months or something. So there's this flavor of short-term exploratory research, long-term exploratory research. Some of these things are focused explicitly on open source frameworks and things like that. So for example, we have this MTRL framework, and the framework was basically created to support research, and the framework was open sourced. So there's some work related to those things as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Again, I'm happy to take feedback in terms of what topics you think would be more relevant for the advanced PyTorch tutorial, because advanced can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So if there's some topic that you specifically want to be covered, now is a good time to say that.
Shagun, probably we will also add send an email to the students to ask for topics.
Okay.
If that's all they want to suggest something.
Sounds good.
Okay, if there are no more questions, probably we can wind up. Okay, so well, thank you once again, Shagun, for